Now it's time to recall. Well, how do you turn that bite of food into a chemical that a cell can recognize and use as energy? Well, the first step is actually altering the food into its component chemical compound and then getting those molecules into your cells. And this process is known as digestion. So once inside your cells, the process of turning that bite of food into useful energy, by what? By the process of cellular respiration begins, right? And the process of digestion results with carbohydrates and other molecules which are, being removed from the consumed food and transported into the bloodstream, you can see. So from there, the nutrients like the carbohydrates, they are what? They are used to release energy, right? So once inside the cell, the process of the cellular respiration will completely oxidize the glucose molecule, releasing what? High energy electrons. And the overall goal is to produce what? To produce ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate. And cellular respiration is what? It is a 4-stage process that begins with what? That begins with glycolysis. And glycolysis means splitting sugars. And it is the first step of cellular respiration which occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. It occurs where? In the cytoplasm of the cell, and glycolysis consists of 2 distinct phases. One is the energy investment phase and the second one is the energy harvesting phase. So what happens in the energy investment phase? 2 ATP molecules transfer energy to the glucose molecule and forming what? 6 carbon sugar diphosphate molecule, and this molecule splits and the energy harvesting phase begins. Now it forms what? During this phase, the 2,3 carbon molecules are converted to pyruvate, as you can see, and ATP is formed. So glycolysis is actually a 10-step reaction that involves the activity of multiple enzymes and enzyme assistants. So in the process, a net of actually you can say 2 molecules of ATP, 2 molecules of pyruvate and 2 high energy electron carrying molecules of NADH, they are actually produced. So when oxygen is present, the pyruvate molecules and NADH enter the mitochondria, and the next stage, after entering the mitochondria, the next stage of cellular respiration begins. The next stage of cellular respiration is what? It involves the movement of pyruvate into what? You can see this molecule of pyruvate, the movement of pyruvate into the mitochondria. So where it undergoes oxidation. So each pyruvate molecule is converted into a compound called acetyl coenzyme A, and in this process of pyruvate oxidation, electrons are transferred to NAD, producing NADH, and a carbon is lost, right? So forming what? Forming carbon dioxide. And the next stage is the citric acid cycle, also called the Krebs cycle. Here acetyl coenzyme A, this molecule which is produced will bind with a starting compound called oxaloacetate, and through a series of enzymatic redox reactions. So all carbons, you can see here, all the carbons, hydrogens and oxygen in pyruvate ultimately end as carbon dioxide and water. So the pathway is called a cycle because oxaloacetate is the starting and ending compound of the pathway. So for every glucose that enters glycolysis, so it is going to go through what? The cycle completes twice, once for each molecule of pyruvate that entered into the mitochondria. So oxidation and the citric acid cycle, a net of 8 NADH we have discussed already, 2 FADH2 and 2 ATP and 6 carbon dioxide are produced for each glucose molecule, right? So in order to understand how the majority of the energy is produced by aerobic respiration, we need to actually understand, you can see we need to actually follow, or you can understand the NADH and FADH2 molecules to the next stage. So the electron transport chain. So what is this electron transport chain? The electron transport chain, as you can see in the mitochondrial matrix, it is a series of membrane bound carriers in the mitochondria that pass electrons from one to another, right? Electrons are transferred between the membrane proteins that are there, and the cell is able to capture energy and use it to produce ATP molecules. So ATP molecules are produced, and proteins in the chain pump hydrogen ions across the membrane. So when the hydrogen ions, they flow back across the membrane, as you can see, through an ATP synthase complex, ATP synthesized by an enzyme, that is ATP synthase. Enzyme is what? ATP synthase. And oxygen act as a terminal electron acceptor. So by accepting electrons, oxygen is reduced to form water, and this respiration brings electron transport chain, and all the high energy electron carriers from the previous stages of cellular respiration, they actually send their electrons into this chain, and from this the bulk of ATP from the you can say entirely of cellular respiration it is produced. The bulk of ATP is produced into this, that is 30 to 36 ATP molecules. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. So we have seen how the 4 stages of the respiration are there and how this energy in the form of ATP is available to us. We have glycolysis and oxidation of pyruvate, citric acid cycle and electron transport chain. So ultimately we have what? 32 ATPs. So oxygen is brought in from what? Oxygen is brought in from this, the bloodstream, to the final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain, and the carbon dioxide that is produced is actually a byproduct that needs to be removed off. So the goal of respiration is to transfer the energy from the food that we eat daily into what? Into ATP. Which is what? The energy currency of the cell. And what is the byproduct? The byproduct is the carbon dioxide that needs to be removed out. So this was a just summarized view about the respiration process that occurs in 4 stages. Remember that we have glycolysis, oxidation of pyruvate, citric acid cycle, and then at the end we have electron transport chain.